Welcome, friend. Take a long, deep breath and let the weight of the world settle into the soft shadows of the room. Tonight, we are going to travel back through the decades, leaving the noise of the modern world behind. Close your eyes and imagine the air growing cool and crisp, smelling of salt spray and the faint metallic scent of a busy harbor. We are entering the early spring of 1912, a time when the world felt immense, solid, and filled with an unshakable belief in its own progress. You are safe here, nestled in the stillness, as we prepare to board a vessel that was more than just a ship. It was a floating world built on the highest hopes of a confident age. Tonight, we walk through the halls and corridors of the Titanic, not to seek out a disaster, but to understand the textures of a life lived at sea when everything felt permanent. We will listen to the rhythmic pulse of the engines, feel the smoothness of polished mahogany, and watch the way the electric lamps glow against the dark Atlantic water. It is a long, slow journey through a vanished time, and there is no need to rush. The water is calm, the stars are clear, and the story is ready to unfold. Let yourself drift as we step onto the docks of Southampton, where a great ship waits quietly under the glow of the harbor lights. Chapter 1: The World That Trusted Itself. In the quiet hours before her maiden voyage, the Titanic rests at the Southampton docks, a massive silhouette of dark steel and glowing portholes. This chapter explores the atmosphere of early spring 1912, a time defined by Edwardian confidence, the rhythmic preparation of the crew, and the unyielding belief that modern engineering had finally mastered the ancient risks of the sea. You stand at the edge of the quay, where the cobblestones are still damp from a light afternoon rain. The air is cool, carrying the scent of coal smoke and the heavy, brine-rich breath of the English Channel. Ahead, the hull of the Titanic rises like a black iron cliff, its surface held together by millions of steel rivets that shimmer faintly in the light of the dock lamps. It is a mainstream historical fact that the White Star Line prioritized comfort and steadiness over raw speed, designing this ship to be a sanctuary of refinement. You feel the immense, silent weight of the vessel, a monument to a world that believed every problem had a mechanical solution. Near the base of the gangway, a wooden newsstand displays the morning papers, their ink still fresh and pungent. The headlines speak of a world in motion, of new railways, expanding telegraph lines, and the steady march of industrial triumph. You notice the organized bustle of the dockside, where porters in thick wool coats move heavy leather trunks embossed with brass initials. There is no sense of hurry, only the rhythmic movement of a system that trusts its own strength. The world feels orderly and predictable, and tonight, that certainty is made real in the massive, dark shape of the ship resting against the wooden pier. A black motorcar pulls up quietly, and a man steps out with the measured grace of a leader accustomed to being followed. This is Captain Edward John Smith, his white beard neatly trimmed, and his dark blue uniform crisp, the gold braid on his sleeves catching the amber glow of the harbor lights. He looks up at the ship, his expression one of calm, professional recognition rather than wonder. Having spent decades at sea, he is known as the millionaire's captain, a figure of such dependability that many wealthy travelers refuse to sail with anyone else. You watch him walk toward the gangway, his footsteps steady on the planks, a human anchor for the confidence of the age. On the deck far above, another figure moves with a different kind of intensity, his eyes fixed on the details that others might overlook. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, walks slowly along the promenade, running his hand over the polished mahogany railing to feel for any imperfection in the finish. In his pocket, he carries a notebook filled with precise calculations and diagrams of every bulkhead and valve. To him, the ship is a masterpiece of balance and logic, a structural truth made of steel and wood. You see him stop to inspect a brass fixture, his presence a quiet reminder that the ship was built with a profound, almost reverent attention to detail. Near the entrance to the first-class lounge, J. Bruce Ismay stands in a long, dark overcoat, looking at the red and white house flag snapping at the masthead. As the managing director of the White Star Line, he represents the corporate ambition that brought this floating world into existence. To him, the Titanic is an advertisement for a new kind of living, one where the sea is not a barrier, but a backdrop for luxury. You notice the way he adjusts his hat, his eyes scanning the horizon where the Atlantic waits in the distance. There is no room for doubt in his posture. He stands at the center of a world where nature has been tamed. Inside the ship, the atmosphere is warm and still, shielded from the harbor wind by thick steel and heavy glass. You move through a first-class corridor where the deep, soft carpet swallows the sound of your footsteps, creating a sense of absolute privacy. In the dining saloon, stewards are engaged in the silent, practiced choreography of preparation, their hands moving with a grace born of repetition. You hear the faint, rhythmic clink of silver against fine bone china as they lay the tables for the first meal at sea. White linen cloths are spread with precision, their surfaces bright under the soft golden glow of the electric chandeliers. You descend toward the lower decks, where a different kind of confidence resides among those who carry their futures in simple wicker baskets. Here, third-class families gather in the communal areas, their faces reflecting the weariness of long journeys, but also a quiet, persistent hope. They look up at the white-painted steel pillars, feeling the scale of the ship as a promise of safe passage to a new world. To them, the Titanic is a bridge across the void, an unshakable machine that will carry them to a better life. You watch a mother adjust her shawl, leaning against a bulkhead, trusting the ship to hold her family safe within its iron arms. Far below the waterline, the heart of the ship is already beginning to beat with a low, vibrant energy. You enter the world of the engineers, where the air is warm and smells of heavy oil and hot steam. Large brass gauges reflect the glow of the lamps, their needles resting at zero, waiting for the command to wake the dormant giants within the boiler rooms. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell moves through the space, his hand resting briefly on a massive steel casing as he confers with his team. There is a profound sense of mechanical reliability here, a belief that the engines are a match for any current or gale the ocean might provide. You walk back to the stern and look out toward the mouth of the harbor, where the water is a flat indigo mirror. In 1912, the North Atlantic is viewed not as a mystery, but as a well-mapped highway, a manageable space governed by schedules and charts. The sea is a familiar neighbor, and the crossing ahead is seen as a routine transit, a scheduled interval of rest between two great continents. You notice the way the light catches the small ripples on the water, a soft, rhythmic movement that seems to harmonize with the slow breathing of the ship as she rests at the dock. As the evening deepens, the lights of Southampton begin to flicker on, creating a scattered map of amber dots along the shoreline. The Titanic remains the brightest object in the harbor, her long rows of portholes glowing like a string of pearls against the dark hull. Some historians still debate the exact mood of this final night on land, whether it was a festive celebration or a quiet, procedural wait. You sense a bit of both as the last mailbags are swung into the hold. The transition from land to sea is almost complete, and the ship has become a self-contained world, a fortress of industry waiting for the dawn. High on the boat deck, in the small Marconi room, the wireless operators are settling into their long watch. Jack Phillips adjusts his headphones, the black leather feeling cool against his ears as he listens to the faint rhythmic crackle of the ether. He taps a key, and a blue spark jumps in the darkness, sending a silent signal out into the night to test the equipment. This is the new magic of the age, the ability to speak across the horizon without wires or visible connection. You watch his hand move with steady precision, a final layer of assurance that the ship is never truly alone in the dark. The night is now fully established, and a soft, expectant silence settles over the dockside as the harbor clock nears midnight. You take one last look at the Titanic, her massive funnels reaching toward the stars and her flags hanging limp in the calm, cool air. There is no sense of impending change, only the deep, comfortable weight of a world that trusts its own creations. The systems are in place, the crew is at their stations, and the passengers are beginning to dream of the days ahead. You feel the stillness of the ship as she waits for the morning tide, a monument to human ingenuity resting in the dark. As the stars turn slowly overhead, the lines are being checked and the boilers are being stoked, preparing for the moment the harbor will fall behind. To understand the quiet confidence of the Titanic as she rested in Southampton, we must travel back even further, leaving the harbor lights for the gray, industrial mist of Belfast. We are moving from the finished masterpiece to the noisy, rhythmic cradle where she was forged, a place of towering steel skeletons and the persistent chime of 3 million hammers. Here, in the Harland and Wolff shipyard, the belief in human progress was not just a headline in a newspaper, but a physical weight you could feel in the vibration of the earth. This is the story of how a floating world was assembled, plate by plate, rivet by rivet, under the watchful gaze of a world that believed it had finally outpaced the reach of tragedy. Chapter 2: Building a Floating World. The journey into the ship's past begins beneath the shadow of the Arrol Gantry, a massive iron structure that looms over the Belfast skyline like a skeletal cathedral. You stand in the mud and coal dust of the Queen's Island shipyard, where the air is thick with the scent of hot iron and the acrid smoke of the forge. Before you, the hull of the Titanic is a vertical cliff of rust-colored steel, stretching so far into the clouds that the sun struggles to reach the ground below. The sheer scale of the project is a mainstream historical fact. At the time, she and her sister, Olympic, were the largest man-made objects ever moved by steam. You feel the immense, heavy ambition of the shipyard, a place where steel was treated as if it were as pliable as clay. Moving closer to the hull, you notice the rhythmic, metallic clinking of the riveting squads, a sound that has defined the city for years. Each squad is a small human machine. A heater pulls a white-hot rivet from a portable furnace, tossing it with glowing precision to a catcher who wedges it into a pre-drilled hole. You watch as the clinchers use heavy hammers to flatten the red-hot iron, sealing 2 massive steel plates together forever. A small material detail of the era involves the use of these iron rivets in the curved sections of the bow, which were hammered by hand rather than by hydraulic machines. You see the sparks fly in the dim morning light, each impact a testament to the thousands of laborers who gave their strength to the ship's skin. You step through a gap in the steel and enter the cavernous interior, where the world is divided into 16 watertight compartments. These are the bulkheads, the heavy walls of steel that gave rise to the ship's reputation for being practically unsinkable. You run your fingers along the cold, vertical edge of a watertight door, noticing the heavy brass gears designed to drop the door into place at the touch of a switch on the bridge. This design was the pinnacle of maritime safety in 1912, based on the assumption that no collision could ever compromise more than the first 4 compartments. In the silence of the unfinished hold, the bulkheads feel like the ribs of a giant, ancient creature, built to withstand a pressure that no one truly expected it to face. Descending further into the depths, you find yourself in the engine rooms, where the scale of the machinery defies the imagination. The reciprocating engines stand 4 stories high, their massive steel pistons polished to a mirror-like finish and coated in a thin, protective layer of grease. Nearby, the low-pressure turbine sits in its bronze casing, waiting to harvest the leftover steam and turn it into the quiet, steady power that would push the ship across the Atlantic. You touch a brass gauge, its needle resting at 0, and feel the cold potential of the machinery. Everything here is built for reliability and repetition, a mechanical heart designed to beat with a steady, unhurried rhythm for thousands of miles without fail. You climb upward, leaving the steel and oil behind for the emerging elegance of the upper decks. In the first-class spaces, the air smells of freshly sawn oak and the fine, powdery dust of the woodcarver's workshop. You watch a craftsman carefully fitting a piece of ornate molding onto the grand staircase, his hands moving with the delicacy of a jeweler. The transition from the raw industrial power of the hull to the refined luxury of the public rooms is seamless. Even as the shipyard laborers continue their heavy work below, these spaces are being transformed into a floating palace, where the iron skeleton is hidden behind layers of mahogany, silk, and gold leaf, creating an illusion of permanence. As you move through the corridors, you notice a subtle difference in the materials used for each class. In the second-class areas, the wood is often sycamore or satinwood, polished to a warm glow that suggests a respectable, quiet comfort. In third class, the steel walls are painted a clean, bright white, and the floors are covered in durable linoleum, smelling of linseed oil. A small, quirky detail of the Harland and Wolff shipyard was the Lord Pirrie's vision of providing third-class passengers with small, private cabins instead of the massive open dormitories common on other lines. You see the small wooden bunks being installed, each one a promise of dignity and privacy for travelers who had rarely known either on the high seas. On the boat deck, you pause beside the massive davits, the mechanical arms designed to lower the lifeboats into the water. The davits themselves are a marvel of engineering, built by the Welland Company to be capable of handling 2 or even 3 rows of boats if necessary. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, more than the legal requirements of the time, but only enough for about half the people on board. You notice the wide, empty expanses of the wooden deck, intended to give first-class passengers an unobstructed view of the sea. The decision to limit the number of boats was based on the belief that the ship itself was the best lifeboat, a sanctuary that would stay afloat long enough for help to arrive. The designer, Thomas Andrews, moves through these spaces with a quiet, observant grace, often stopping to consult a roll of blueprints. He is known for his unassuming authority, often seen chatting with the laborers to learn about the practical behavior of the materials. You see him lean against a railing, testing its stability with a firm grip, his eyes reflecting the calculations of weight and buoyancy. He does not see the ship as a myth or a legend, but as a complex system of variables that must be kept in balance. To him, Every rivet and every beam is a responsibility, a silent contract between the builder and the sea that he takes with a profound, professional seriousness. There is a gentle historical uncertainty regarding the launch of the ship in May 1911. While many later accounts speak of a sense of impending doom or the lack of a traditional christening, Harland and Wolff rarely christened their vessels, preferring a quiet procedural entry into the water. You imagine the moment the massive wooden triggers are released, and the ship begins to slide down the grease-covered slipway. The sound is a low, thundering roar as 22 tons of tallow and soap allow the hull to meet the sea for the first time. There is no cheering crowd in your mind, only the deep, resonant vibration of the earth as the ship claims her place in the harbor. By early 1912, the ship is no longer a skeleton of iron, but a completed floating world, ready for her sea trials. You see the smoke beginning to curl from the 3 functional funnels, the 4th being a decorative ventilator designed to maintain the ship's majestic symmetry. The trials are brief and successful, a series of turns and stops that confirm the machinery's competence. There is a sense of completion in the air, the feeling of a long labor finally coming to an end. The ship is a masterpiece of industrial confidence, a vessel that embodies the highest reach of its time. You feel the stillness of the completed hull, a silent giant waiting for the people who will soon bring it to life. As the shipyard workers begin to clear their tools and the gantries fall silent, the Titanic prepares to leave Belfast for the last time. She is no longer just a project of Harland and Wolff. She is a ward of the White Star Line, a system of steel and wood that is now ready for the human systems that will operate her. You look back at the receding shipyard, where the smoke of the forges still hangs in the air, and feel the weight of the labor that built this world. The construction phase is over, and the era of routine service is about to begin. The ship is whole, the water is waiting, and the next chapter of the journey is drawing near. We leave the ringing hammers of Belfast behind, carrying the memory of the hot rivets and the polished oak with us. The transition from the shipyard to the bridge is a movement from the hands of the builders to the hands of the officers. Ahead, the brass telegraphs are glowing in the dim light, and the watch schedules are being drawn up. Stay in this state of deep calm as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the human hierarchy that ran the ship and the trust they placed in the order of the sea. You leave the ringing hammers and the industrial mist of Belfast behind, the memory of the red-hot rivets fading into a quieter, more disciplined world. The transition from the hands of the builders to the hands of the operators is a movement from raw steel to refined procedure. As you move through the ship's interior, you notice that the Titanic is no longer a construction site, but a living hierarchy of nearly 900 crew members, each a vital gear in a massive floating clock. Ahead, the bridge is bathed in a dim, amber light, and the brass telegraphs are waiting for the touch of a steady hand. You are entering the world of the people who ran the ship, a community governed by rank, habit, and a profound trust in the order of the sea. Chapter 3: The People Who Ran the Ship. At the pinnacle of this human order is the bridge, a space of polished teak and silent authority that overlooks the long, dark stretch of the forward deck. You stand in the shadows as Captain Edward John Smith arrives for his final night watch before the voyage begins in earnest. He moves with a quiet, practiced dignity, his white beard a stark contrast to the deep navy of his uniform. In his hand, he carries a heavy leather binocular case, its strap worn smooth from years of service. Smith does not need to raise his voice to command. His presence is the anchor of the ship's discipline. You notice the way he checks the barometer, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of reading the sky's subtle intentions. Beside him, the bridge officers move with a shared, unspoken understanding of their roles. You watch First Officer William Murdoch as he adjusts a brass dial on the engine room telegraph, the metal clicking softly in the stillness. Murdoch is a man of few words, his expertise etched into the calm, decisive lines of his face. Nearby, Second Officer Charles Lightoller checks the watch schedule, his movements precise and rule-oriented. It is a mainstream historical fact that these men were chosen for their extensive experience on large white star liners. They trust the systems around them because they have spent their lives mastering the predictable rhythms of maritime law and professional habit. You descend from the bridge, leaving the cool night air for the warm, vibrating heart of the engineering department. Deep below the waterline, Chief Engineer Joseph Bell stands among a forest of steel pipes and hissing steam valves. The air here smells of heavy oil, hot metal, and the faint, briny scent of the river water used for cooling. Bell carries a small, oil-stained notebook in his pocket, filled with the daily pressures and temperatures of his dormant giants. You notice the way he touches a brass gauge, his hand sensitive to the slightest tremor in the machinery. There is a deep, mechanical intimacy in his work, a belief that any problem can be solved with a wrench and a steady mind. Further down, in the stokehold, the atmosphere shifts into a world of orange firelight and black coal dust. You see the firemen, their bare torsos glistening with sweat as they rhythmically shovel coal into the yawning, incandescent mouths of the furnaces. The sound is a constant, grinding scrape thud as the heavy shovels meet the steel floor and then the fuel. Each man moves in a trance-like state of exertion, his life defined by the 4-hour watch and the unrelenting need to keep the steam pressure high. You notice a small tin cup of water resting on a ledge, its surface covered in a thin film of coal dust, a tiny human detail of the labor that powers the ship's grace. As you move back toward the passenger areas, you encounter the stewards, the silent army of service that makes the ship feel like a luxury hotel. You see a first-class steward in a crisp, white jacket, meticulously memorizing the cabin assignments and dietary preferences of the guests soon to board. He carries a silver tray with a single, perfectly folded linen napkin, his posture upright and attentive. It is a mainstream historical fact that the steward hierarchy was as rigid as the bridges, with each man reporting to a senior official responsible for a specific deck. You watch him straighten a decorative vase, his hands moving with the practiced invisibility of a professional whose goal is to be unnoticed. In the small, cramped Marconi room, the wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, are surrounded by the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of their equipment. The air here feels alive with a static, electrical energy, smelling faintly of ozone and warm vacuum tubes. You watch Phillips as he leans over the key, his headphones clamped tight against his ears as he listens to the faint, crackling voices of distant ships. He marks a coordinate on a slip of paper with a steady hand, his face illuminated by the green glow of the dials. For these young men, the Titanic is a floating antenna, a point of light in a dark, silent ocean that they must connect to the world. Walking through the promenade, you see a group of men in dark suits, moving with a quiet, observant intensity. These are the members of the Guarantee Group, a hand-picked team from the Harland and Wolff shipyard, led by Thomas Andrews himself. They are here to monitor the ship's first voyage, looking for a sticky door or a vibrating pipe that might need adjustment. You notice one man running a finger along a mahogany panel, feeling for the slightest gap in the joinery. There is a quirky historical detail in their presence. They are neither crew nor passengers, but a bridge between the builders and the users, a final layer of human assurance that the ship is as perfect as calculation can make it. This human system is built on an Edwardian trust in order and rank. Every man on board knows exactly who is above him and who is below, a structure that provides a profound sense of security in the face of the unknown. You notice the way a junior officer deferentially steps aside for a senior one, a small gesture of respect that reinforces the ship's internal discipline. They believe that if everyone follows the rules and performs their assigned task, the ship will be as safe as a stone cathedral. It is a collective confidence, a shared assumption that the complexities of the modern world have been successfully organized into a manageable, predictable routine. You move to the forward deck and look up at the crow's nest, where the lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, are preparing for their shift. They wear heavy wool overcoats and mufflers against the biting wind of the Atlantic, their eyes already trained to scan the dark horizon for the slightest break in the water. You hear the rhythmic climb, climb, climb as they ascend the internal ladder of the mast, disappearing into the cold, starry night. It is a mainstream historical fact that the lookouts relied solely on their natural vision, as binoculars were often reserved for the officers on the bridge. You feel the isolation of their post, a high, lonely vigil above the sleeping world of the ship. In the crew's mess, the atmosphere is more relaxed, a space of wooden tables and the smell of strong tea and tobacco smoke. You see a group of sailors sharing a quiet joke before their watch begins, their voices low and companionable. They speak of other ships, of past voyages, and of the unique steadiness of the Titanic's hull. There is a gentle historical uncertainty regarding the exact nature of their conversations. Some later accounts suggest a feeling of unease about the ship's size, while others remember only a sense of pride in being part of the greatest crew on the ocean. To them, the ship is not a legend, but a workplace, a familiar home of steel and salt. As the night watch takes over, the ship settles into a state of quiet procedural readiness. You hear the rhythmic clanging of the ship's bell marking the half hour, a sound that travels through the corridors like a heartbeat. On the bridge, the silhouettes of the officers are steady against the stars, their gaze fixed on the compass and the dark sea ahead. Below, the firemen continue their hot, orange labor and the stewards finish their final checks of the dining rooms. The human system is fully engaged, a complex web of authority and trust that holds the Titanic together. You feel the profound order of the vessel, a world where every soul has a purpose and every purpose is known. The people who ran the ship have found their rhythm, and the Titanic is now a living entity, guided by the hands of those who believe in her. The bridge is silent, the engines are steady, and the night is calm. But the ship is more than just a workplace. It is a social landscape, a place of divided worlds and different expectations. Ahead, the gangways are being readied for the arrival of the passengers, the people whose hopes and histories will soon fill the empty rooms. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the social world of the Titanic and the layers of the human crossing. You leave the bridge and the engine room behind, the rhythmic clanging of the stokers' shovels, fading into a distant hum that vibrates softly beneath the floor. The transition from the world of labor to the world of the passengers is a movement from raw energy to polished grace. As you move along the corridors, you notice the Titanic transforming into a grand social landscape, a city on the water where every hallway and staircase is a silent instruction on where one belongs. The morning sun of April 10th filters through the tall windows of the docks, illuminating a sea of feathered hats, wool overcoats, and heavy leather trunks. You are entering a world of divided expectations, where the ship is seen as a promise of both luxury and a new beginning. In the first-class boarding areas, the atmosphere is one of hushed, expensive calm. You watch as a wealthy family arrives, their dozens of trunks embossed with brass initials and smelling of fine cedar and old money. They move across the gangway with a casual, practiced ease, greeted by name by stewards who seem to have memorized the social register of 2 continents. You follow them toward the grand staircase, where the light from the overhead glass dome pours down like a silver waterfall. The air here smells of lemon oil, expensive tobacco, and the fresh, floral scent of lilies. For these travelers, the Titanic is not just a ship. It is a grand hotel that happens to be moving across the Atlantic. The grand staircase is the heart of this elite world, a masterpiece of carved oak and wrought iron that spirals downward through the center of the ship. You run your hand along the polished banister, feeling the intricate curves of the wood beneath your palm. In the center of the first landing, the ornate clock titled "Honor and Glory Crowning Time" ticks with a slow, steady rhythm, its golden hands marking the hours of a world that believes it has mastered time itself. You notice a first-class passenger pausing here to check his gold pocket watch, his reflection caught in the mirrors that line the walls. There is a profound sense of permanence in this space, a feeling that nothing could ever disturb such heavy, gilded order. Moving away from the center of the ship, you find the world of the second-class passengers, a space of respectable, middle-class comfort. You walk down a corridor where the walls are painted a warm cream and the air smells of freshly printed newspapers and tea. Here, the passengers include academics, clergy, and small business owners, people who appreciate the ship's modernity without the need for first-class ceremony. You see a family settling into their cabin, the children bouncing gently on the upholstered bunks while the father arranges his books on a small wooden desk. It is a mainstream historical fact that Titanic's second-class accommodations were so superior they rivaled first class on many other liners of the time, providing a quiet, dignified security. As you descend toward the lower decks, the polished oak gives way to white-painted steel and the clean, industrial scent of linoleum. You are entering the world of the third-class passengers, the hundreds of immigrants whose hopes for a new life are tied to the strength of the ship's hull. You see a young mother holding her child's hand as they find their small, private cabin, her eyes wide as she touches the electric light switch on the wall. For many of these travelers, the Titanic represents the first time they have ever experienced indoor plumbing or a bed of their own. You notice the way they handle their modest wicker luggage, with a careful, protective reverence, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and a quiet, glowing hope. The architecture of the ship is a silent enforcer of the social order, with gates and stairways designed to keep the different classes from mingling. You watch a steward standing at the top of a third-class companionway, his posture polite but firm as he directs a group of travelers away from the promenade reserved for those above. This segregation was not merely a matter of company policy. It was a requirement of international immigration laws and the rigid social codes of the 1912 era. You notice how the ship's layout creates multiple worlds within a single hull, each with its own routines and boundaries. It is a human hierarchy made of steel, where everyone understands their place in the grand design. Despite the physical walls between them, all the passengers share a common, unshakable assumption: the crossing will be routine. You see a first-class gentleman seated at a mahogany writing desk, the ink flowing smoothly from his fountain pen as he composes a letter to his business partner in London. He describes the ship as a mountain of steel and mentions the pleasant, stable vibration of the engines. His words reflect the mainstream historical confidence of the age, a belief that the Titanic has rendered the dangers of the sea obsolete. There is no mention of lifeboats or ice in his letter, only a calm discussion of arrival times and the quality of the coffee in the Parisian-style café. Near the aft deck, you observe a third-class family looking out at the receding coastline of England. They lean against the railing, their hands gripping the cold steel as they watch the gray docks of Southampton fade into the mist. A small human detail catches your eye. The father pulls a piece of hard bread from his coat pocket and shares it with his son, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the Atlantic begins. To them, the Titanic is not a luxury hotel, but a mountain of hope that will carry them across the void. They do not see the ship as a statement of vanity, but as a sturdy, reliable bridge to a world where they might finally find a piece of land of their own. A quirky shipboard detail involves the class-neutral spaces like the mail sorting room, where clerks from both Britain and America work side by side, regardless of social standing. You descend into the bowels of the ship, where the air is cool and smells of hemp sacks and fresh ink. You see the clerks rapidly sorting thousands of letters into wooden pigeonholes, their hands moving with the rhythmic speed of people who have a schedule to keep. This is the nervous system of the ship, the place where the world's thoughts are organized and stored. Even here, deep inside the hull, the order and efficiency of the 1912 world are visible in every sorted envelope and every tied bundle of string. There is a gentle, scholarly uncertainty regarding the famous locked gates that separated third class from the lifeboats. While later myths suggest these gates were kept bolted during the entire disaster, some researchers suggest they were procedural barriers that were often left open during the day or managed by stewards. You look at a simple iron gate at the end of a corridor. It's latch-heavy but movable, and realize that the truth likely lived between memory and procedure. In the calm of the voyage, these gates are merely markers of a social map, part of the quiet, everyday architecture of class that no one on board expects to become a matter of life and death. As evening begins to settle over the Atlantic, the ship becomes a glowing lantern of social hierarchy. You stand on the promenade deck, watching the first-class passengers stroll in their evening finery, their silk dresses and black ties shimmering under the electric lights. Below them, the sound of a fiddle drifts up from the third-class common room, a lively, rhythmic tune that speaks of home and the journey ahead. The ship is a symphony of different lives, all moving at 21 knots across a calm, dark sea. You feel the profound stability of the vessel, a world where the social order feels as solid and enduring as the riveted steel of the hull itself. The Titanic is full now, a complete human ecosystem settling into the routines of the crossing. You hear the rhythmic chiming of the ship's bell marking the hour, a sound that resonates through the mahogany suites and the white-painted cabins alike. The social world of the ship is in balance, held together by the trust that every passenger has placed in the crew. The engines and the name of the White Star Line. You stand for a final moment at the railing, feeling the cold sea air on your face as the lights of Europe disappear. Ahead, the open ocean waits, and the ordinary logistics of departure are drawing to a close. we leave the divided worlds of the passengers behind. Moving toward the moment, the ship truly claims the Atlantic. The transition from the dock to the open sea is a movement from the land's order to the ocean's wide, indifferent horizon. Ahead, the tugboats are casting off their lines, and the great whistle is about to sound its final farewell. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the logistics of departure and the ship's first steps into the deep, black water. You leave the divided worlds of the passengers behind, moving through the quiet corridors toward the sound of the ship's rhythmic preparation. The transition from the dock to the open sea is a movement from the land's solid order to the ocean's wide, indifferent horizon. As you walk, you notice the Titanic transforming from a stationary marvel of Belfast steel into a living traveler of the deep. The morning sun of April 10, 1912, is rising over the harbor, casting a pale, silver light that illuminates the final bustling logistics of departure. You are entering the first active hours of the voyage, where the tugboats are waiting and the great whistles are preparing to sound their final, resonant farewell. Chapter 5. Leaving Land Behind. The morning of April 10 arrives with a crisp, pale light that washes over the docks of Southampton. You stand near the edge of the pier, watching as the final preparations are made for the most anticipated voyage of the year. The air is sharp, carrying the metallic scent of the harbor mixed with the faint aroma of coal smoke from the ship's massive funnels. Titanic sits at her berth, a towering wall of black steel that seems to dwarf every building in the city. There is a sense of quiet, industrial pride in the air, a feeling that the ship is not just a vessel, but a masterpiece of human order ready to begin her work in the world. High above the waterline, the gangways are lowered, looking like thin wooden bridges connecting the land to the floating world of the ship. You hear the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of thousands of footsteps on the planks as the passengers begin to board in organized, class-defined waves. Crew members in dark uniforms stand at the entrance of each gangway, checking tickets and directing travelers with a polite, measured authority. There is no frantic rushing, only the steady movement of a well-rehearsed system. You notice a first-class passenger pausing to adjust his coat, his hand resting briefly on the brass railing as he looks down at the pier one last time, before stepping into the ship's warm interior. Along the side of the hull, large rope nets are being hoisted by steam winches, carrying hundreds of heavy canvas sacks filled with the King's Mail. Titanic is a Royal Mail ship, a title of great prestige that underscores her role in the global network of communication. You hear the rhythmic chug-chug-chug of the winches and the soft thud of the bags hitting the deck as they are lowered into the holds. Inside the ship, in the sorting room, clerks are already preparing to organize these letters, which carry the thoughts and business of 2 continents. Each sack is a bundle of invisible threads connecting the ship to the land she is about to leave behind. Beneath the glitter of the upper decks, the reality of the ship's hunger is visible in the final loading of the coal. You notice a faint, black dust settling on the white paint of the lower hull, a reminder of the hundreds of tons of fuel required to maintain the ship's steady progress. Deep in the bunkers, trimmers are moving the coal with heavy iron shovels, their work hidden from the view of the embarking passengers. The scent of the coal is thick and earthy, a sharp contrast to the floral perfumes of the first-class lounge. It is a mainstream historical fact that a coal strike had recently affected the region, requiring the White Star Line to consolidate fuel from other vessels to ensure Titanic's departure. At precisely noon, the deep, resonant blast of the ship's whistle sounds, a vibration so powerful it seems to shake the very air in your lungs. You watch as the heavy hawsers, the thick ropes securing the ship to the dock, are cast off by the workers on the quay. 6 small tugboats, looking like busy insects beside the massive hull, begin to strain against their lines to pull Titanic away from her berth. The water churns into a white, foamy froth as the ship's propellers take their first slow turns in the harbor. You feel the heavy movement of the ship as she detaches from the land, a transition that feels as significant as a moving mountain. As Titanic moves into the channel, a sudden and unexpected moment of drama occurs that breaks the calm of the departure. The massive displacement of water caused by the ship's movement creates a powerful suction, pulling the moored liner New York toward the Titanic's side. You hear the sharp crack of the New York's mooring lines snapping like dry twigs under the strain. The 2 ships drift closer, their hulls separated by only a few yards of dark water. Tugs rush to intervene, their engines roaring as they push against the smaller ship to prevent a collision. It is a moment of silent tension, a reminder of the immense forces that govern a vessel of such unprecedented size. There is a gentle scholarly uncertainty regarding the significance of this near miss. While some later accounts from survivors and sailors describe the incident as a bad omen, many researchers suggest that such events were relatively common in crowded harbors during the era of increasingly large steamships. You watch as the crew on the bridge remains calm, their movements procedural as they wait for the tugs to clear the path. Once the New York is secured, the Titanic continues her journey, the incident quickly becoming a topic of conversation rather than a cause for alarm. The ship's momentum is restored, and the city of Southampton begins to recede into a soft, gray haze of harbor mist. The ship finds her stride as she enters the English Channel, the engines settling into a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that vibrates through the deck. You move to the railing and look back at the coastline of England, which is now a thin, dark line on the horizon. The water has changed from the murky green of the harbor to a deep, restless indigo. You feel the first true sea breeze on your face, a cold, salt-laden wind that strips away the scent of the docks and replaces it with the freshness of the open ocean. The Titanic is no longer a static object in a city. She is a traveler, claiming her place in the wide, indifferent world of the sea. By early evening, the ship arrives at Cherbourg, France, her massive funnels glowing in the light of a setting sun. The harbor is too shallow for the ship to dock, so she rests in the outer roadstead, while 2 tenders, the Nomadic and the Traffic, approach from the shore. You watch as these smaller vessels pull alongside, looking like children nestled against the side of a giant. The air is cool and smells of the French coast, a mixture of salt air and damp stone. The lights of Cherbourg begin to twinkle in the distance, amber jewels against the darkening hills. It is a moment of quiet maritime elegance, a pause in the journey to welcome new guests. On the morning of April 11, the ship reaches Queenstown, now known as Cobb, the final stop before the open Atlantic. You see the tender America pulling alongside, its deck crowded with third-class passengers carrying their lives in modest trunks and woven baskets. These are the last to board. Immigrants from the Irish countryside, their faces a mixture of sorrow for the land they are leaving and hope for the one they seek. You notice a young man looking up at the Titanic's bow, his hand gripping the railing of the tender as he takes in the scale of his new home. The ship's whistles sound a deep, resonant farewell that echoes across the hills of the Irish coast. A small material detail of the stop at Queenstown is the final delivery of the post. You watch as bags of mail are lowered into the tender, carrying postcards and letters written by passengers in the first few hours at sea. These messages are the last physical connections to the land. Simple notes describing the size of the cabins, the quality of the food, and the steadiness of the crossing. You see a steward handing a bundle of postcards to a clerk, the colorful images of the ship a bright contrast to the gray water. Once the mail is transferred, the tender pulls away, and the last link to Europe is severed. The Titanic is now a world unto herself. The ship turns westward, her bow cutting through the Atlantic swells with a slow, majestic grace. You stand at the very stern, watching as the green hills of Ireland gradually shrink into a dark line and then vanish into the mist. The great ocean now stretches out in every direction, an infinite expanse of water and sky that makes the ship feel both immense and tiny at the same time. You hear the rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of the engines increasing in speed, their power pushing the ship toward the far horizon. The voyage has truly begun, and the land is now a memory. Stay in this state of relaxation as we settle into life at sea. You leave the sight of the Irish coast behind, the green hills fading into a soft gray memory as the Titanic turns her bow toward the open Atlantic. The transition from the busy ports of Europe to the vast empty horizon of the ocean is a movement into a world of deep, predictable routine. As the ship finds her cruising rhythm, the days begin to blend into a seamless cycle of meals, walks, and quiet shipboard activities. You are entering the heart of the voyage, where the comfort of the interiors and the steady vibration of the engines create a profound sense of security. Here, in the middle of the deep black water, life feels as permanent and orderly as if the ship were still moored to the dock. Chapter 6. Life at Sea and the Comfort of Routine. As the first full day at sea begins, the Titanic settles into a steady cruising speed of 21 knots, her massive hull cutting through the Atlantic swells with a graceful, unhurried power. You stand on the A-deck promenade, where the morning air is crisp and carries the bracing scent of salt spray and cold, clean water. The teak deck beneath your feet is scrubbed white and smooth, reflecting the pale sunlight of the open ocean. You notice the first-class passengers beginning their morning constitutional, walking the length of the deck in measured, rhythmic steps. There is a calm confidence in their movement, a feeling that the ocean is no longer a wilderness to be feared, but a scenic backdrop for their daily exercise. Nearby, a deck steward in a navy blue uniform moves quietly among the rows of wooden deck chairs, unfolding heavy wool blankets with a soft, rhythmic snap. He works with a practiced efficiency, ensuring that every footrest is aligned and every passenger is tucked in against the biting Atlantic wind. You watch him offer a cup of hot bouillon to a passenger, his voice a low, respectful murmur that barely disturbs the silence of the sea. It is a mainstream historical fact that the White Star Line took immense pride in this level of invisible service. You notice the scent of floor wax and fresh linen lingering in the air, small domestic details that make the great ship feel more like a sanctuary than a machine. Moving inside, you enter the first-class library, a room of polished mahogany and deep, velvet-covered armchairs. The atmosphere is hushed, filled with the soft, rhythmic scratching of fountain pens against heavy stationery. You see a passenger seated at a small writing desk, carefully composing a letter that he hopes to mail upon arrival in New York. He describes the ship as the most stable platform imaginable, noting that the vibration of the engines is so faint it barely makes the ink in his well tremble. You notice the texture of the embossed paper and the soft glow of the green-shaded lamps, small anchors of Edwardian respectability in the middle of the vast, indifferent ocean. Descending to the lower decks, the scent of mahogany and lemon oil is replaced by the savory aroma of baking bread and roasting meats. In the third-class dining room, the atmosphere is more lively and communal, a space of long wooden tables and the bright clatter of ceramic plates. You watch as families share their morning meal, their voices a mixture of Gaelic, Scandinavian, and Eastern European dialects. Despite the simplicity of the surroundings, there is a sense of abundance and order that many of these travelers have never known. You notice the way a father carefully portions out a piece of fresh fruit for his child, his hand steady and his expression filled with a quiet, hopeful pride. Deep in the hull, far below the reach of the passengers' laughter, the ship's nervous system is hard at work. You enter the mail sorting room, where the air is cool and smells of hemp sacks and the ink of 1,000 different stamps. 5 postal clerks, 3 American and 2 British, are engaged in a frantic, rhythmic dance of organization, sorting through nearly 3,000 bags of mail. You watch as they flick envelopes into wooden pigeonholes with a speed that seems impossible, their movements synchronized with the slow, steady tilt of the ship. It is a mainstream historical fact that these men worked long, grueling shifts to ensure that every letter reached its destination. Further down, the heat of the boiler rooms creates a world of orange firelight and rhythmic physical labor. You stand in the shadows as a team of firemen, their faces smudged with coal dust, heave shovels of black fuel into the glowing furnace mouths. The sound is a constant, grinding shush thud that marks the passage of every mile. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell moves through the space, his hand resting briefly on a vibrating steam pipe as he checks the pressure. There is a deep, mechanical trust here. The engineers believe that as long as the coal burns and the steam flows, the ship is invulnerable. You notice the sweat glistening on a stoker's brow, a human sacrifice to the ship's relentless progress. In the small, cramped Marconi room, the atmosphere is alive with the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of the wireless key. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride are surrounded by stacks of passenger telegrams, their headphones clamped tight as they listen for signals from the shore. The air smells of ozone and warm oil, a sharp, modern scent that feels out of place in the middle of the sea. You watch Phillips as he clears a backlog of messages, his hand moving with a steady, mechanical precision. For him, the ship is not an isolated world, but a hub of invisible connections. You notice the blue spark of the transmitter, a tiny, flickering light in the heart of the great dark ship. By mid-afternoon, the ship settles into the comfortable ritual of tea, a social requirement that brings the different worlds of the ship into a shared, rhythmic pause. You see the waiters in the first-class lounge moving with silver trays, the porcelain cups chiming softly against the saucers. In the second-class library, passengers gather around wooden tables, sharing stories of past travels and future plans. There is a gentle historical uncertainty regarding the exact musical repertoire played by the ship's band during these hours. Some remember light operettas, while others recall more popular dance tunes. Regardless of the melody, the music provides a soft, sonic curtain that makes the Atlantic feel like a garden party. As the sun begins to set, casting long, golden shadows across the promenade, the ship transforms into a glowing lantern of electric light. You stand at the railing, watching the water turn from indigo to a deep, impenetrable black. The air has grown significantly colder, a sharp, dry chill that makes you pull your coat tighter. Inside, the first-class dining saloon is being readied for the evening's formal dinner, the tables sparkling with crystal and silver. You hear the rhythmic click-clack of the steward's shoes on the stairs, a sound of organized readiness. The ship is a masterpiece of social timing, a world where the clock is more powerful than the tide. In the evening stillness, you walk along the boat deck, looking up at the 4 massive funnels that reach toward the stars. Only 3 of them are venting smoke, the 4th serving as a majestic ventilator for the galley and engine rooms. You hear the low, rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the propellers far below, a sound that has become the ship's heartbeat. You notice the way the light from the portholes reflects on the calm surface of the sea, creating a trail of golden dots that follows the ship into the dark. There is no sense of movement, only a feeling of being suspended in a vast, glittering void, held safe by the ship's iron strength. By midnight, the Titanic is a world of quiet, enclosed dreams. You move through the corridors where the lamps have been dimmed, the only sound the soft creaking of the wood paneling as the ship breathes in the swells. You notice a lifebelt lying on a chair in a second-class corridor, its white canvas and cork straps looking out of place in the polished hallway. It is a mainstream's historical fact that most passengers never bothered to learn how to wear them, trusting entirely in the ship's reputation. You feel the profound weight of that trust, a collective confidence that fills the cabins and the halls like a warm, invisible blanket. The first days at sea have provided their sanctuary, a world of habit and comfort that makes the Atlantic feel manageable. You stand at the stern, watching the white wake of the ship disappear into the blackness of the ocean, a path of foam that marks the ship's progress toward the west. The routine has done its work, grounding the passengers and crew in a sense of absolute permanence. But ahead, in the dark, the environment is changing, and the first whispers of the ice are beginning to find their way to the bridge. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night. We leave the comfortable routine of shipboard life behind, moving toward the silent, cold world of the wireless room and the chart table. The transition from the warm dining rooms to the biting air of the crow's nest is a movement from the human world to the ocean's reality. Ahead, the telegraph is beginning to tap out messages that the sea has hidden in the dark. The stars are bright, the water is flat, and the ice is waiting. You leave the warmth of the first-class library, the scent of expensive paper and leather fading as you step through the heavy wooden door onto the boat deck. The air hits you with a sudden, sharp clarity. It has grown significantly colder since the afternoon tea. You pull your wool coat tighter, feeling the biting Atlantic wind on your face as you look out toward the horizon. The sun has disappeared, leaving behind a sky of deep velvet indigo, and the ocean has become a vast, impenetrable mirror of black glass. You notice the way the ship's electric lights create long, golden paths on the water, a trail of modern brilliance in an ancient, silent wilderness. You walk toward the Marconi room, where the rhythmic, high-pitched tap-tap-tap of the wireless key cuts through the low-frequency thrum of the engines. Inside, Jack Phillips is leaning over the desk, his face illuminated by the soft green glow of the dials and the flickering of the blue spark. His fingers move with mechanical precision, translating a stream of passenger telegrams into dots and dashes for the station at Cape Race. Beside him, Harold Bride sorts through a stack of incoming messages, his hand pausing as he reads a report from the steamer Coronia regarding field ice and bergs directly in their path. The room smells of ozone and warm oil, a cramped hub of invisible energy. You notice the way the wireless operators handle the navigational warnings. It is a mainstream historical fact that the wireless service was primarily a commercial venture. prioritizing the backlog of expensive passenger greetings over the occasional ice reports from other vessels. Phillips takes the Coronia message and places it under a paperweight on the chart table, his mind already returning to the stream of personal messages about arrival times and theater bookings. You see the blue spark of the transmitter jump again, a tiny, defiant light in the middle of the dark ocean. There is no sense of alarm in the room, only the steady, procedural pace of two young men clearing their daily workload. On the bridge, the atmosphere is one of disciplined, quiet confidence. You watch as Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall enters the chart room, his movements calm and efficient as he picks up the latest position reports. He dips a pen into a bottle of red ink and marks a small X on the paper chart, indicating the reported location of the ice field to the west. The map is a vast expanse of white paper, and the mark looks tiny and insignificant against the scale of the Atlantic. Boxhall glances at the coordinates, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He has seen these marks on many voyages before. Ice is a seasonal neighbor, a hazard to be watched, but not a reason to break the ship's stride. You move back to the promenade deck, where a few first-class passengers are taking a final walk before the evening meal. You see a man stop to check the temperature at a mahogany-cased thermometer on the wall, his breath appearing as a faint white plume in the cold air. The mercury has plummeted toward freezing, a sharp drop that makes the passengers hurry back toward the warmth of the interior. You hear the rhythmic click-clack of their shoes on the teak deck as they disappear through the heavy glass doors. Despite the chill, the ship feels immense and solid beneath your feet, a mountain of steel that seems far more real than the invisible bergs mentioned in the wireless room. High above you, the lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee are beginning their watch in the crow's nest, their wool mufflers wrapped tight around their necks. You look up at their silhouette against the stars, a lonely perch nearly 100 feet above the water. They scan the dark horizon with steady, unblinking eyes, searching for the telltale white water of waves breaking against the base of a berg. You feel the cold wind whistling through the rigging, a high-pitched, lonely sound that underscores the isolation of their post. Without binoculars, they rely solely on their sight, trusting that the clear, moonless night will reveal any danger in time for the bridge to react. A new message arrives from the ship Baltic, reporting ice directly on the Titanic's track. You watch as a steward carries the slip of paper to the bridge, where Captain Smith reads it under a dim lamp. He discusses the report with Second Officer Lightoller, their voices low and measured. Smith decides to alter the ship's course slightly to the south, a standard procedural adjustment meant to provide a wider margin of safety. You notice the way he tucks the message into his pocket, his expression calm and unbothered. It is a gentle historical uncertainty whether he shared all these warnings with the other officers, or if some remained unrecorded in the logs. But the routine on the bridge continues without a single missed beat. You walk to the very bow of the ship and look down at the Atlantic, which has become eerily flat and still. There is not a single whitecap in sight, no swell to disturb the perfect mirror of the water. This flat calm was a rare and deceptive condition. Without waves to break against the base of an iceberg, the ice would remain almost invisible until the ship was nearly upon it. You notice the way the stars are reflected in the water, a double horizon of glittering silver that makes it difficult to tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. The ocean feels strangely dormant, a silent black void that offers no clues to what lies hidden in the darkness ahead. In the engine room, the heat remains intense, the firemen unaware of the freezing air on deck as they continue their rhythmic labor. You stand on the steel grating as Chief Engineer Joseph Bell checks the steam gauges, his hand resting on the vibrating railing. The ship is making 22 knots, her propellers turning with a powerful, consistent rhythm that pushes her deeper into the ice zone. Below the machinery, the coal trimmers move through the bunkers, their shovels scraping against the steel as they keep the fires fed. They do not see the charts or hear the wireless. They only know the demand for power and the steady, reassuring thrum of the ship's progress. Moving back through the second-class lounge, you see a group of passengers gathered around a piano, singing a hymn before retiring for the night. The sound of their voices is warm and communal, a soft contrast to the cold blackness pressing against the portholes. You notice a small child leaning against her father's shoulder, her eyes heavy as the music soothes her towards sleep. There is a profound sense of safety in this room, a collective belief that the ship's lights and the crew's discipline have created an invulnerable world. You see the steam rising from a cup of tea on a nearby table, a tiny cloud of comfort in the middle of the North Atlantic. A final warning from the steamer Masaba arrives at the wireless room, reporting much heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs directly ahead. Jack Phillips is busy clearing a backlog of messages for the station at Cape Race, and he sets the Masaba report aside on his desk, intending to deliver it once the passenger traffic is finished. You watch his hand move rhythmically over the wireless key, the blue spark snapping in the dark room. This message, more urgent and specific than the others, remains unread by the officers on the bridge. You feel the weight of the silence in the room, a quiet gap in the human system, through which the reality of the sea is beginning to slip. On the horizon, the lights of another ship, the Californian, appear as a tiny flickering spark in the distance. She has encountered the ice and decided to stop for the night, her captain choosing safety over schedule in the dark, moonless water. You stand on the Titanic's boat deck, looking toward that distant light, which is soon obscured by the ship's own brilliance. To the people on the Titanic, the other ship is just a passing neighbor, a minor detail in a wide and empty ocean. You hear the rhythmic hum-hum-hum of the Titanic's engines as she charges ahead, her speed unchanged and her confidence intact. The night is beautiful, the water is still, and the ice is now very close. You stand at the railing for a final moment, feeling the freezing air on your face and the steady, unyielding vibration of the ship beneath your feet. The Titanic is a world of light and iron, moving through a landscape of ice and shadow that she cannot yet see. The routine of the voyage has become so powerful that it masks the shifting reality of the environment, creating an illusion of permanence in a world of constant motion. You take one last deep breath of the salt air before turning toward the warm interior. The charts are marked, the lookouts are ready, and the ship is entering the final quiet hours of the night. We leave the wireless room and the cold air of the bridge behind, moving toward the final ordinary morning of the voyage. The transition from the accumulation of warnings to the calm of Sunday is a movement into the peak of the ship's confidence. Ahead, the dining rooms are being readied for the Sunday services, and the passengers are putting on their coats for the final morning walks. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the quiet, peaceful hours of Sunday, April 14, and the final moments of the unsinkable ship's routine. You leave the cold, static-filled air of the Marconi room behind, the rhythmic tapping of the wireless key fading into the steady, reassuring thrum of the ship's engines. The transition from the invisible world of radio waves to the tangible comfort of the ship's interior is a movement back into a world of shared confidence. It is Sunday, April 14, the final ordinary day of the voyage. As you walk through the corridors, you notice that the ship has become a familiar home to those on board. The routines of meals, prayer, and rest have settled into a peaceful, predictable cadence. The Atlantic remains a silent, dark companion outside the glass, while inside, the Titanic is a cathedral of light and Edwardian order. Chapter 8, Sunday, April 14th. The morning sun of Sunday arrives with a brilliant, blinding clarity, reflecting off a sea so flat and still it looks like hammered pewter. You stand on the boat deck, watching the pale light illuminate the massive white funnels and the long, orderly rows of lifeboats. The air is sharply cold, a dry, biting chill that makes the passengers pull their wool coats tight as they step out for their morning walk. You notice the way the light catches the salt crystals on the brass railings, turning the ship into a glittering jewel in the middle of a vast, empty blue. There is no sense of urgency here, only the quiet, dignified beauty of a morning spent at the center of the world. In the first-class dining saloon, the atmosphere is hushed and reverent as the morning breakfast gives way to the Sunday service. You watch as Captain Smith takes his place at the front of the room, his white hair and beard appearing silver under the soft glow of the chandeliers. A steward places a prayer book on a small table draped in the White Star flag, its red and white colors vibrant against the wood. It is a mainstream historical fact that these services were a staple of shipboard life, a time for the different classes to share a rare moment of communal reflection. You hear the rhythmic opening of hundreds of books, a sound like a soft, collective sigh in the stillness of the room. The sound of the congregation singing "Eternal Father, Strong to Save" rises through the ship, its low, melodic swells reaching even the lower decks. You stand in the doorway, watching the way the passengers hold their hymn books with a quiet, practiced devotion. The lyrics speak of those in peril on the sea, yet the irony of the words is lost in the profound sense of security provided by the ship's iron walls. You notice a young woman in a lace dress closing her eyes as she sings, her face a mask of absolute peace. The music provides a sonic curtain of safety, a reminder that in 1912, the order of God and the order of engineering were seen as one and the same. After the service, you move to the second-class promenade, where the atmosphere is more relaxed and social. You see a group of men in bowler hats standing by the railing, discussing the day's run and the impressive speed the ship has maintained since leaving Queenstown. They consult their pocket watches with a rhythmic precision, noting the time and the position marked on the public charts. A small human detail catches your eye. A child has left a wooden hoop-and-stick toy resting against a deck chair, its simple shape a contrast to the complex machinery of the ship. The child is nowhere to be seen, likely exploring the library or chasing the breeze along the aft rail. As the afternoon progresses, you notice a thermometer mounted in a mahogany casing on the wall of the A-deck promenade. The mercury has been dropping steadily since noon, and it now hovers just a few degrees above the freezing mark. You see a passenger stop to check the reading, his breath appearing as a sharp, white plume before he quickly ducks back inside the glass-enclosed deck. There is a gentle scholarly uncertainty regarding exactly how much the passengers noticed the plunging temperature. Some later remembered it as a sudden, alarming chill, while others saw it as a normal part of the North Atlantic crossing. To you, it feels like a physical warning, a cold finger tracing the edge of the ship's path. Inside the palm court, The air is warm and smells of fresh tea, damp ferns, and the faint citrus scent of bergamot. You watch the stewards move with silver tea services, the porcelain cups chiming softly against the trays in a rhythmic, liquid music. The string quintet is playing a light, popular air, the notes of the violins floating through the room like silk ribbons. You notice a first-class passenger carefully peeling a piece of fruit with a silver knife, his movements slow and deliberate. The ship is a masterpiece of sensory management, providing the greenery and the music of a garden party in a place where no plants could ever naturally grow. Descending to the engine room, you find the heat unchanged, a fierce orange world that knows nothing of the freezing air on deck. You stand on the steel grating, watching the firemen as they take advantage of the Sunday routine to perform minor maintenance on the boiler doors. The sound is a rhythmic tink-tink-tink of small hammers against metal, a lighter version of the shipyard's roar. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell is reviewing the coal consumption logs, his red pen marking the steady decrease in the ship's fuel supply. You notice the way the light from the furnaces flickers across the brass gauges, a reminder of the raw, industrial power that sustains the ship's refined elegance. By late afternoon, the Titanic is moving through a sea that has become unnervingly smooth. You walk to the bow and look down at the water, which shows not a single ripple or whitecap. The surface is like a sheet of dark obsidian, reflecting the deep blue of the sky with such perfection that the ship seems to be gliding through the air. This flat calm is a rare and beautiful anomaly, a moment where the ocean appears to be holding its breath. You feel the steady, unvarying vibration of the propellers through the soles of your shoes, a heartbeat of steel that continues westward with an unshakable, rhythmic confidence. In the first-class dining saloon, the stewards are preparing for the evening's formal dinner, which will include a special party hosted for Captain Smith. You watch as they arrange the crystal glasses and the heavy silver cutlery, their white gloves moving with a rhythmic, ghostly grace over the white linen. Each place setting is a testament to the ship's prestige, a world of fine china and etched glass that reflects the golden light of the chandeliers. You notice the way a steward meticulously aligns a silver salt cellar with the edge of the table, his attention to detail a small, human part of the grand system of Edwardian hospitality. As the dinner begins, the room is filled with the low hum of polite conversation and the soft clatter of silver against porcelain. You see Captain Smith seated at the head of a table, his dark evening dress a stark contrast to the white linen and the sparkling crystal. He is surrounded by some of the ship's most influential passengers, their faces relaxed and confident in the warm, lit room. A passenger raises a glass of port, the dark red liquid catching the light as he offers a toast to the ship's maiden voyage. There is no sense of impending change here. The room is a fortress of social grace, a place where the world feels as solid and certain as it ever has. In the third-class communal spaces, the evening is more vibrant and loud, filled with the rhythmic sawing of a wooden fiddle and the stomping of feet on the linoleum. You stand near the doorway, watching a young man play a lively jig while his friends dance in a tight, energetic circle. The air smells of simple beer, tobacco smoke, and the heat of many bodies in a small space. It is a world of movement and life, a stark contrast to the formal stillness of the decks above. You notice a mother sitting on a bench, her hand resting on her child's shoulder as she watches the dancers, her face reflecting the quiet joy of a journey nearly half complete. As the night deepens, you move back toward the wireless room, where Jack Phillips is now alone at the key. The air is alive with the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of passenger messages being sent to the station at Cape Race. Phillips is working through a thick stack of telegrams, his face illuminated by the green glow of the wireless lamp. He is busy, stressed by a recent equipment failure, and he works with a frantic, mechanical speed to clear the backlog. You notice a new ice warning from the ship Masaba lying on the desk, partially covered by a pile of personal messages. The blue spark of the transmitter snaps in the dark, a tiny, rhythmic signal sent out into the cold, starry night. On the bridge, the 8 p.m. watch change occurs with a quiet procedural efficiency. Second Officer Lightoller takes command, his eyes immediately checking the compass and the mercury in the thermometer. He speaks in low tones with the outgoing officer, discussing the temperature drop and the exceptional clarity of the night. You watch as he orders the bridge lights to be extinguished to improve their night vision, leaving the space in a state of deep, moonless shadow. The only light comes from the glowing brass, binnacle, and the brilliant stars overhead. The bridge is a place of silent, cold vigilance, a dark room moving through a dark world. You climb the internal ladder to the crow's nest, where Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee are beginning their final watch of the day. The air up here is freezing, a sharp, dry wind that cuts through their wool mufflers and makes their eyes water. You look out over the horizon with them, seeing the stars reflected so perfectly in the flat sea that it is impossible to tell where the water begins. The lookouts scan the dark void ahead, their gaze moving rhythmically from left to right, searching for the blue bergs that offer no white water to give them away. You feel the isolation of their post, a high, lonely vigil in a silent, freezing universe. The Titanic is now a world of quiet interiors and cold, starry decks, her lights reflecting like a long, golden ribbon on the still Atlantic. You stand at the railing, feeling the vibration of the engines and the biting chill of the air on your face. The Sunday routine has reached its final, peaceful hour, and the ship is moving toward midnight with a steady, unyielding confidence. You hear the rhythmic hum-hum-hum of the hull as it cuts through the glass-like water, a sound of absolute normalcy in a night that feels vast and indifferent. The day is done, the prayers have been said, and the ship is alone with the stars. We leave the quiet confidence of the Sunday routine behind, moving toward the moment where the silence of the night will be interrupted by the sea. The transition from the warm dining rooms to the cold darkness of the forward deck is a movement from the human world to the ocean's reality. Ahead, the lookouts are narrowing their eyes against the dark, and the bridge is waiting for the signal. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the quiet, undramatic moment of the impact and the first whispers of the ice. You leave the warm, amber glow of the Sunday evening routine behind, the soft echoes of the ship's band fading as you move through the heavy glassed doors onto the open deck. The transition is a sharp, physical breath of winter. The temperature has finally plunged below the freezing mark. You feel the sudden, dry bite of the Atlantic air on your skin, a cold so pure it seems to rattle in your chest. Ahead, the forward deck is a long, dark shadow stretching toward the horizon, illuminated only by the brilliant, unblinking stars. The ocean has become a perfect, terrifying mirror, a sheet of black glass that shows no movement, no foam, and no warning. High in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stand in a world of absolute, freezing silence. You look up at their dark silhouettes against the glittering Milky Way, their wool mufflers pulled tight over their mouths to warm the air they breathe. The wind created by the ship's speed is a constant, icy whistle in the rigging, a lonely sound that underscores the vastness of the empty sea. It is a mainstream historical fact that the lookouts were straining to see through a strange, oily haze on the horizon, their vision hampered by the lack of binoculars. You feel the tension of their high, cold vigil as they search for a break in the stars. At approximately 11:40, a dark mass suddenly materializes out of the blackness, less than half a mile ahead. It is not a towering mountain of white, but a black berg, its base soaked in water and reflecting none of the starlight. You watch as Frederick Fleet reaches for the brass bell, striking it 3 times, a sharp, rhythmic clang, clang, clang that shatters the silence of the night. He grabs the telephone to the bridge, his voice steady despite the cold as he utters the famous warning. Iceberg. Right ahead. There is a singular, crystalline moment of realization, a quiet heartbeat where the world of the ship and the world of the ice are about to meet. On the bridge, 6th Officer Moody receives the call, and 1st Officer Murdoch reacts with a practiced, mechanical speed. You watch his hand grip the brass handle of the engine room telegraph, pulling it back with a sharp, metallic clack to signal full astern. He barks the order hard a-starboard to the helmsman, his eyes fixed on the dark shape looming over the bow. The ship begins to answer her helm, the massive bow swinging slowly, agonizingly, toward the left. You feel the silent tension in the room. A world of polished wood and glowing compasses where every second is a measure of survival. The engines beneath you begin to throb with a new, jarring vibration as they fight to reverse the ship's momentum. The Titanic continues to pivot, her bow clearing the main mass of the iceberg, but the turn is not quite enough. You stand on the forward promenade and watch as the dark, jagged wall of ice glides along the starboard side nearly close enough to touch. There is no thunderous crash, no violent explosion of steel. Instead, you hear a soft, rhythmic shushing sound, followed by a faint, metallic scraping that vibrates through the soles of your shoes. It is a strangely delicate noise, like the sound of a silk dress tearing or a giant finger tracing the side of the hull. For many on board, the impact feels less like a collision and more like a gentle, curious hesitation. A quirky material detail of the impact is the shower of ice fragments that tumbles onto the forward well deck as the berg scrapes past. You see small, glassy chunks of ancient ice scattered across the dark teak, looking like spilled diamonds in the moonlight. A passenger, drawn to his window by the vibration, steps out onto the deck and picks up a piece, curious about its weight and coldness. He tosses it back toward the sea, unaware that this crystalline dust is the first sign of a fatal breach. The iceberg disappears into the darkness aft, a silent, indifferent shadow returning to the void of the North Atlantic, leaving the ship to face its invisible wounds. Deep below the waterline, in boiler room number 6, the experience is far from gentle. You stand on the steel floor plates as the hull plates groan and the rivets pop with the sound of distant gunfire. Suddenly, a thin, vertical seam opens in the steel, and the Atlantic rushes in, a freezing green torrent that hisses as it hits the hot machinery. The sound is a deafening roar of water and escaping steam, a violent intrusion into the orderly world of the firemen. It is a mainstream historical fact that the iceberg did not create a long gash, but rather a series of small openings that allowed water to enter multiple compartments at once. The warning bells for the watertight doors begin to ring, a sharp, rhythmic ting-ting-ting that echoes through the lower corridors. You watch as the heavy steel doors, each weighing nearly half a ton, begin their slow, vertical descent toward the floor. Fireman Frederick Barrett narrowly escapes through a closing door, just as the water reaches his ankles. the heavy steel ceiling with a muffled, final thud against the sill. The system has worked exactly as Thomas Andrews intended, isolating the flooding into individual sections. But as you look at the rising water, you realize the problem is not the doors, but the height of the walls they are meant to guard. On the bridge, the order is given to stop the engines entirely. You feel the vibration of the propellers cease, a sudden and profound silence that feels more alarming than the impact itself. The Titanic, which has been a living, humming creature for 4 days, is now a drifting island of steel. The only sound is the high-pitched, rhythmic hiss of the safety valves on the funnels, venting excess steam into the cold night air. It is a lonely, haunting noise that travels for miles over the still water. You see Captain Smith arrive on the bridge, his face calm but his eyes searching Murdoch's for a truth that has not yet been spoken. A gentle historical uncertainty surrounds the exact maneuvers Murdoch attempted in those final seconds. Some researchers argue that reversing the engines actually made the ship harder to turn, while others suggest it was the only logical choice to reduce the force of an inevitable blow. You see the officers conferring over the telegraphs, their faces pale in the dim light of the binnacle. Perhaps the truth lived somewhere between memory and the frantic physics of the moment. Regardless of the debate, the ship is now motionless, her lights reflecting in a sea that remains as flat and indifferent as a sheet of black marble. Thomas Andrews arrives on the bridge, his heavy wool coat over his arm and his roll of blueprints clutched in his hand. You watch as he and the captain speak in low, urgent tones before heading below to inspect the damage. They move through the first-class corridors, past passengers who have stepped out of their cabins in pajamas to ask why the engines have stopped. You notice a steward politely reassuring a woman that it is nothing more than a minor precaution, his hand resting on the brass door handle with habitual grace. The contrast between the lit, warm luxury of the hall and the freezing water rising below is a silent, growing tension. You stand at the railing and look down into the black water, noticing how the ship's bow has already begun to settle by a few almost imperceptible inches. The Titanic feels different now, less like a stable mountain and more like a heavy weight being slowly claimed by the depths. The stars above are still brilliant and cold, watching over the silent ship with a glittering indifference. You hear the rhythmic lap-lap-lap of the water against the steel hull, a small, wet sound that marks the beginning of the end. The impact was quiet, the damage was hidden, and the world on deck is still waiting for the first sign of the truth. We leave the drifting ship and the quiet bridge behind, moving toward the moment of calculation and the first distress calls. The transition from the silent impact to the slow realization of the sinking is a movement from disbelief to an organized, desperate urgency. Ahead, Thomas Andrews is unfolding his charts, and the wireless room is beginning to tap out the first calls for help. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night, discovering the slow gap between perception and reality on the unsinkable ship. You leave the silent bridge and the drifting bow behind, moving back into the interior of the ship where the electric lamps still burn with a steady, golden warmth. The transition from the biting air of the deck to the heated corridors is a movement between two worlds, one that has already accepted its fate, and one that is still dreaming of a morning in New York. As you walk, you notice the Titanic beginning to settle, a slow, heavy lean to the bow that makes the long hallways look like they are gently tilting toward the sea. You are entering the hour of calculation, where the cold logic of engineering meets the quiet, persistent disbelief of a world that was never taught how to sink. Chapter 10. Realizing the Ship Will Sink. You follow Thomas Andrews as he descends into the mailroom on G-deck, his leather boots splashing softly into 2 feet of freezing, dark water. The air here smells of wet hemp and the cold, metallic scent of the Atlantic. You watch as the postal clerks, their faces pale in the dim light, scramble to pull heavy canvas mail bags from the rising flood, moving them toward the higher sorting tables. It is a mainstream historical fact that these men worked with a desperate, rhythmic speed to save the king's mail, even as the water reached their waists. You notice a damp envelope floating on the surface, its ink beginning to blur, a tiny, dissolving record of a connection that will never be made. Returning to the bridge, Andrews unfolds his blueprints on the polished mahogany chart table, his pencil moving with a steady, clinical precision. You see him mark the 5 forward compartments that are already open to the sea: the forepeak, the 3 holds, and boiler room number 6. He explains to Captain Smith that while the ship was designed to float with any 4 compartments flooded, it cannot sustain 5. As the bow sinks, the water will simply spill over the top of the bulkheads into the next section, like water filling an ice cube tray. You watch his hand rest on the paper, the red ink marking the ship's certain end. It is a moment of absolute, mathematical clarity in a room filled with shadows. Captain Smith listens in a state of profound inward stillness, his hands gripped tightly behind his back. He understands that from this moment forward, he is no longer commanding a ship, but managing a countdown. He gives the order to the bridge officers to begin clearing the lifeboats, his voice a low, gravelly murmur that carries no trace of panic. You notice the way he looks out at the dark, silent horizon, his eyes reflecting the glitter of the cold stars. It is a mainstream historical fact that he knew there were not enough boats for everyone on board. You feel the weight of this silence, a heavy, procedural calm that settles over the bridge as the first orders for the evacuation are spoken. You move along the first-class corridors, where the stewards have begun their quiet, nightly rounds of a different kind. You watch a steward in a crisp white jacket knocking softly on a mahogany cabin door, his voice polite and steady as he asks the passengers to put on their warm coats and life belts. "Just a precaution," he says, his hand resting habitually on the brass handle. He has memorized every occupant on his deck, and he moves from one door to the next with a rhythmic, unhurried grace. You notice a life belt lying on a plush velvet chair, its white canvas and cork straps looking strangely primitive against the elegant wallpaper of the room. In the first-class smoking room, the atmosphere remains warm and filled with the scent of expensive cigars. A group of men sits around a card table, the rhythmic snap, snap, snap of the dealing cards the only sound besides the low hum of the ventilation. One man points to a small pile of ice that a steward has brought in from the deck, laughing as he drops a shard into his glass of scotch. To them, the stop is merely a curiosity, an anecdote to be told over breakfast tomorrow. You watch the amber liquid swirl around the ancient ice, the warmth of the room acting as a soft, sensory barrier against the reality of the freezing water rising just a few decks below. In the Marconi room, Jack Phillips is now tapping out the distress signal with a frantic, rhythmic intensity, the blue spark snapping like a trapped bird in the dark. Beside him, Harold Bride is adjusting the dials, his face illuminated by the green glow of the equipment. They have switched from the standard CQD to the newer SOS, a signal that carries a sharp, international urgency. A quirky human detail remains in the memory of Harold Bride, who recalled suggesting the change to SOS with a dark, exhausted joke. It's the new signal, and it may be your last chance to send it. You watch as Philip smiles briefly before his hand returns to the key, sending their position out into the vast, unresponsive night. You descend toward the third-class corridors, where the situation feels more immediate and visceral. Here, the families have been awakened not by a steward's knock, but by the sight of water trickling along the linoleum floors. You watch a father lifting his young daughter onto his shoulders, his hands gripping a heavy wicker trunk as they move toward the stairways. There is a sense of confused, quiet movement, a sea of voices in a dozen different languages, all asking the same unspoken question. You notice a small, discarded shoe floating in a puddle near the base of a steel staircase, its leather dark and heavy with the salt water. The world of the lower decks is the first to feel the cold truth of the sea. On the boat deck, the crew has begun the rhythmic task of uncovering the lifeboats. You hear the clack, clack, clack of the wooden blocks and the dry rustle of the canvas covers being pulled away. The lanterns on the deck cast long, flickering shadows that dance across the riveted steel of the funnels. You watch as a seaman tests the tension of a rope, his breath appearing as a sharp white plume in the freezing air. There is a gentle historical uncertainty regarding why the first-class passengers were not more forcefully urged to board the boats. Perhaps the officers believed that a calm, voluntary process was better than an honest, terrifying one. The result is a deck filled with people who are watching the preparations as if they were a distant play. You walk to the railing and look down at the bow, noticing that the name Titanic is now only a few feet above the black, mirror-like surface of the Atlantic. The ship is no longer a mountain. It is a weight. You hear the rhythmic, high-pitched hiss of the steam escaping from the safety valves on the funnels, a sound like a giant, dying breath. This noise is so loud that it makes conversation difficult, forcing the crew to communicate with hand signals. You watch a flare rocket being carried toward the bridge, its white casing looking small and fragile. It is the ship's last way of screaming for help, a silent light for a silent ocean. Thomas Andrews moves through the crowds on the boat deck, his face a mask of weary, professional focus. He stops to help a woman tighten the straps of her lifebelt, his hands moving with a gentle, fatherly care. He knows the math better than anyone, yet he continues to move with a quiet, procedural grace, offering a few words of reassurance to anyone who asks. You notice how he avoids looking at the lifeboats, his mind perhaps replaying the calculations he made in the chart room. He is a man who has seen his life's work become a countdown, and he meets it with a dignity that provides a steadying anchor for those around him. The lights of the ship remain bright, reflecting in the flat water and making the ice fragments on the deck shimmer like fallen stars. This continued brilliance is the ship's greatest deception. As long as the lamps glow and the heaters hum, it is almost impossible for the passengers to believe they are in danger. You see a man leaning against a brass-rimmed porthole, looking out at the dark horizon as if he were waiting for a carriage to arrive. The Edwardian world was built on a trust in systems, and even now, as the deck begins to slope beneath their feet, that trust remains the most powerful force on board. It is a confidence that only the water will eventually break. We leave the lit corridors and the tilting decks behind, moving toward the moment where the lifeboats are lowered into the void. The transition from the ship's realization to the human hesitation of the evacuation is a movement from the collective to the individual. Ahead, the ropes are creaking in the davits, and the cold water is waiting to receive the first of the boats. Stay in this state of deep, quiet relaxation as we move toward the next chapter of the night. discovering the slow, uneven process of the lifeboats and the final choices made under the cold Atlantic stars. You leave the tilting corridors and the quiet calculation of the chart room behind, moving on to the open boat deck where the air has reached a point of absolute, crystalline cold. The transition from the ship's interior to the deck is a movement from a world of wood and carpet to a world of rope, steel, and black water. As you walk, you notice the Titanic's bow has dipped far enough that the well deck is now lost beneath the surface, yet the ship still blazes with light. You are entering the long hour of the lifeboats, a time defined by the rhythmic creak of pulleys, the hiss of white rockets, and the strange, persistent hesitation of a crowd that cannot yet believe the safety of the land is gone. You stand near the forward davits, the massive mechanical arms that hold the lifeboats suspended over the dark void. The sound of the winch is a rhythmic, metallic grind and clack as the crew begins to swing lifeboat number 7 out over the side. You notice the way the thick hemp ropes, white and stiff with the cold, vibrate under the weight of the empty boat. It is a mainstream historical fact that this first boat was lowered at 12:45, with only 28 people on board, despite having a capacity for 65. You watch the small, white-painted craft hover for a moment before descending into the shadows, a tiny splinter of wood disappearing toward the black Atlantic mirror. A strange stillness hangs over the crowd on the deck, a quiet that feels heavier than the air itself. You notice how the passengers huddle in small groups, their wool coats pulled tight and their hands buried in their pockets. There is a profound reluctance to leave the ship. The Titanic is warm, bright, and seemingly stable, while the lifeboats look like fragile, open baskets hanging over a terrifying abyss. You see a woman pull her shawl closer, stepping back from the railing as a steward invites her to board. To many, the act of getting into a boat feels like the first real admission of danger, a step they are not yet ready to take. On the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch moves with a controlled, quiet urgency, his voice steady, as he directs the loading process. He follows a policy of women and children first, but he allows men to take empty seats if no women are waiting. You watch him help a young couple into a boat together, his hand resting briefly on the man's shoulder as he gives the signal to lower. Murdoch's side of the ship is a world of practical efficiency, where the goal is to fill the boats and get them away from the hull. You notice the rhythmic thud of the boat hitting the water far below, a sound that carries through the still night air. Across the deck, on the port side, Second Officer Lightoller enforces a much stricter interpretation of the captain's order. To him, the instruction means women and children only. You watch as he turns away a group of men, including a father who stands quietly as his wife and daughter are lowered into the dark. Lightoller's face is a mask of rigid, Edwardian duty, his movements precise and unyielding. This difference in interpretation meant that boats on the port side often left with dozens of empty seats. You feel the tension of this procedural divide, a human variable that quietly determines the fate of the people standing in the moonlight. High above the bridge, a sudden hiss and roar shatters the silence as the first distress rocket is fired into the sky. You watch the white streak of light climb hundreds of feet into the air before blooming into a brilliant silver cloud of stars that illuminates the funnels and the sea. The rockets are fired at regular, rhythmic intervals, their silent descent back toward the water, a haunting, beautiful display of desperation. It is a quirky human detail that many passengers, seeing the white flares, assumed they were part of a celebration or a signal to a nearby ship. They watched the lights as if they were fireworks, unaware that the color white was a maritime scream for help. In the middle of the boat deck, near the entrance to the grand staircase, the ship's band has begun to play. You see the 8 musicians, led by Wallace Hartley, standing in their dark overcoats, their instruments glowing under the deck lamps. The music is light and rhythmic, rags, waltzes, and popular tunes that provide a familiar, domestic sonic curtain for the evacuation. You notice how the sound of the violin travels across the water, a thin, elegant thread of culture in the middle of a wilderness. The band is not playing to save lives, but to save the atmosphere, to keep the Edwardian sense of order from fraying into the cold dark. You move toward the aft of the ship, where the third-class passengers have begun to arrive on the boat deck in larger numbers. They have traveled upward through a labyrinth of white-painted steel corridors and steep companionways, some guided by stewards and others finding their own way. You see a mother holding her 3 children close, her eyes wide as she takes in the sight of the half-empty lifeboats pulling away. There is a gentle historical uncertainty regarding the gates that separated the classes. While some accounts remember them being kept closed, others suggest they were simply part of a system that prioritized those closest to the deck. The result is a quiet, crowded realization of the limited time remaining. The cold has become an almost physical weight, a dry, numbing presence that makes your fingers stiffen. You notice a passenger standing near a railing, a lifebelt lying unused at his feet. As he writes a final note in a pocket diary by the light of a corridor lamp, he stops to blow on his hands, his breath a thick cloud in the starlight. People are beginning to put on their lifebelts now, the white canvas vests creating a strange, uniform look among the crowd. You watch a steward helping an elderly man tighten his straps, the sound of the canvas rubbing against the wool coat a soft, rhythmic shush in the night. A small human detail involves J. Bruce Ismay, who is seen helping to load lifeboat number 5 on the starboard side. He moves with a frantic, uncharacteristic energy, urging women to board and assisting Murdoch with the pulleys. You notice the way he avoids the gaze of the passengers, his face pale and drawn in the shadows of the funnels. Nearby, Thomas Andrews continues his rounds, moving from boat to boat with a quiet, observant grace. He is no longer calculating the ship's life. He is calculating the safety of the people. He points toward a lifeboat, his voice a calm, fatherly instruction that cuts through the growing hum of the crowd. The deck has reached an angle that makes standing difficult without a firm grip on the railing. You feel the forward tilt of the ship as a constant, heavy pull toward the bow. The Titanic is no longer a horizontal world. It is becoming a slope of steel and wood. You watch as a deck chair slides slowly across the teak, its wooden legs scraping with a rhythmic creak-creak until it hits the forward bulkhead. This physical change is the most powerful communicator of the truth. The ship is no longer a sanctuary. You see people beginning to move toward the stern, their silhouettes dark against the glowing portholes of the sinking bow. In the Marconi room, Bride and Phillips continue their work, though the ship's power is beginning to dim. You see the blue spark of the transmitter flickering, its rhythmic snap growing weaker as the water reaches the dynamo rooms deep below. They are still sending the ship's coordinates, their hands moving with a mechanical, exhausted speed. Philip's face is set in a mask of intense concentration, his headphones still clamped tight against his ears. They have been told by the captain that they are free to leave, yet they remain at the quay, a final invisible link between the Titanic and the world that is rushing toward her through the ice. The last of the standard lifeboats is being lowered now, leaving the boat deck in a state of quiet, crowded abandonment. You hear the rhythmic splash of the oars as the boats pull away into the dark, the survivors looking back at the ship as she blazes with electric light. The Titanic is a magnificent, glowing jewel against the black water, her funnels reaching toward the stars even as the sea begins to claim her bridge. You stand on the slanted deck, feeling the freezing wind and the immense silence of the Atlantic. The evacuation is almost over, and the ship is entering her final, solitary struggle with the sea. We leave the creaking davits and the half-filled boats behind, moving toward the final minutes of the great ship. The transition from the evacuation to the final plunge is a movement from the human will to the forces of gravity and water. Ahead, the stern is rising toward the stars, and the lights are beginning to flicker for the last time. Stay in this state of deep relaxation as we move toward the final chapter of the night, discovering the rescue at dawn and the enduring memory of the unsinkable ship. You leave the creaking davits and the half-filled boats behind, moving toward the final, solitary struggle of the great ship as she settles into the deep. The transition from the frantic activity of the evacuation to the absolute silence of the final plunge is a movement from the human will to the cold, unyielding forces of gravity and water. As you stand in the stillness of a drifting lifeboat, you notice the Titanic's stern rising slowly against the stars, her lights flickering like dying embers in the dark. You are entering the final minutes of the floating world, a time of profound quiet, a dawn of rescue, and the beginning of a memory that would change the world's confidence forever. The Titanic stands now at a steep, impossible angle, her bow lost in the black water and her stern reaching toward the glittering belt of Orion. You watch from the distance of a lifeboat as the golden light of the interior begins to pulse and fade. The electrical dynamos deep below, struggling to provide one last measure of warmth. There is no sudden explosion, only the rhythmic groaning of the steel hull as it bears a weight it was never designed to carry. You hear the soft, distant tink-tink of breaking glass as the pressure increases, a delicate sound in a night that has become vast and hollow. The ship is no longer a monument. She is a shadow, surrendering her silhouette to the Atlantic. A mainstream historical fact involves the final failure of the lights, which occurred just moments before the ship disappeared. You watch as the golden glow suddenly vanishes, replaced by a deep, impenetrable indigo that makes the ship almost invisible against the sea. In this new darkness, the white rockets have stopped firing, and the only light comes from the cold, indifferent stars reflected in the flat water. You notice a small, flickering lantern in one of the lifeboats, a tiny, rhythmic point of yellow that seems incredibly fragile in the center of the void. The great ship is now a silent, tilting giant, moving through her final, lonely transition into the deep. The sinking itself is a slow, majestic movement into the Earth's most profound silence. You hear the muffled thud of internal bulkheads giving way, a sound that carries across the still water like a low, rhythmic heartbeat. There is no sensational drama in this final plunge, only the steady, unhurried claim of the sea as the water reaches the base of the stern funnels. You watch as the water closes over the last of the mahogany and the white-painted steel, leaving only a few swirling ripples on the surface. A small material detail involves the sudden, sharp hiss of escaping air, a giant's sigh that marks the moment the ship is fully consumed by the dark. For the survivors in the lifeboats, the hour that follows is a world of absolute, numbing cold, and a silence so deep it feels like a physical weight. You sit on a wooden bench, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that smells of salt and old linen, listening to the rhythmic slap-lap-lap of the water against the hull. The air is so still that you can hear the soft breathing of the people around you, a collective, fragile rhythm of survival. You notice the way the starlight glitters on the ice fragments floating nearby, looking like pieces of a broken mirror. There is no sense of time here, only the persistent, dry chill of the Atlantic night. As the pre-dawn light begins to gray the eastern horizon, a new light appears, a single, steady green spark in the distance. This is the Carpathia, her engines pushed to their absolute limits to reach the coordinates sent by Jack Phillips hours before. You watch as the green light grows into the glowing silhouette of a ship, her funnels pulsing with thick black smoke as she cuts through the ice field. It is a mainstream historical fact that Captain Arthur Rostron ordered every possible comfort readied for the survivors, from hot coffee to spare blankets. You feel the first true pulse of hope as the ship's whistle sounds a deep, resonant greeting across the water. The boarding of the Carpathia is a slow, methodical ritual of rescue. You watch as the first lifeboat pulls alongside the towering steel hull and a rope ladder is lowered into the shadows. One by one, the survivors are helped onto the deck, their movements stiff and slow from the long hours of exposure. You see a steward in a crisp, dark uniform wrapping a thick, warm blanket around a shivering child, his hands steady and his voice a low, comforting murmur. The air on the Carpathia smells of fresh coffee, warm bread, and the soft medicinal scent of the infirmary. It is a world of safety, a solid platform that has returned to claim you from the void. On the decks of the rescue ship, the atmosphere is one of hushed, hollow shock. You see the survivors sitting on benches and mats, their eyes fixed on the empty horizon where the Titanic once blazed with light. There is very little conversation. The scale of the loss is a weight that defies the rhythm of speech. You notice a first-class gentleman holding a ceramic cup of tea, his hands shaking so much the liquid ripples in the dawn light. He still wears his evening dress, now stained with salt and soot, a tattered uniform of a world that ended at midnight. The silence here is profound, a shared, heavy realization of the lives left behind in the dark. The world that receives the news of the Titanic's loss is a world that is fundamentally changed. In London and New York, the rhythmic clack-clack of the telegraph machines brings the lists of survivors to the waiting crowds. But the lists are far shorter than the hopes of the people on the piers. You imagine the inquiry rooms where the officers and designers are asked to explain the impossible. It is a mainstream historical fact that these investigations led to the first international requirements for lifeboats for all and a continuous wireless watch. You see the red ink of the new regulations on the page, a bureaucratic attempt to prevent a tragedy that everyone had believed was impossible. A gentle historical uncertainty surrounds the final moments of the men who stayed behind, from Thomas Andrews to Captain Smith. Some later accounts suggest a scene of quiet resignation, while others remember only a frantic, desperate effort to launch the last collapsible boats. You see a vision of Thomas Andrews standing in the first-class smoking room, his hand resting on the mantel of the fireplace, looking into the void. Perhaps he was calculating the flaws in his masterwork, or perhaps he was simply finding a quiet place to meet the end of his world. The truth lives between the fragments of memory and the silence of the sea, a mystery held by the deep. The legacy of the Titanic is not one of horror, but of a quiet, enduring warning about the nature of human confidence. You stand at the edge of the memory, looking back at the ship as a symbol of an era that believed it could outpace the shadows. The Titanic remains on the ocean floor, a vast, rust-covered cathedrals of steel, resting in the absolute darkness of the abyss. You feel the profound stillness of the wreck, a place where the clocks have stopped and the linen has turned to silt. She is no longer a traveler, but a landmark, a quiet reminder that even the strongest systems must respect the indifferent power of the world. As the morning sun fully rises over the Atlantic, the Carpathia turns toward the west, leaving the site of the sinking behind. You look at the flat, indigo water, which shows no trace of the floating world that vanished just hours before. The sea has returned to its rhythmic, ancient movement, oblivious to the history that was made in its depths. The lanterns are lowered, the story is complete, and the weight of the night is finally lifting. You feel a sense of deep, peaceful closure, a realization that the memory of the ship will live on as a soft, rhythmic pulse in the history of the sea. Sleep now, cradled by the stillness of the room and the memory of the stars. The voyage is over, the rescue is complete, and the Atlantic is quiet once more. The lights of the harbor are waiting, and the world is safe. If you found peace in this long, slow journey through the Titanic's world, I invite you to gently like the video and subscribe for more nights of history. The lanterns are out, the water is still, the night is yours. Good night.